Hi, this is Ed, and welcome back to Ed's Pop-O-Matic podcast, a retro pop culture podcast where everything retro beats the new if you keep it in your heart. Um, we're doing a series of tribute bands, tribute to bands that covering all kinds of bands out there. If you look up on Google or whatever for what's playing in your area, various clubs, nightclubs, various bars, various band shells by the beach, things like that. You're going to see every rock band in history probably by now has its own tribute band. And no more than anybody else, there are Beatles tribute bands,
All of the
and
popular bands.
they are the most popular bands. Then it's incredible because the Beatles, well, there's nothing better than the Beatles, you know. And
I think so.
I have a special guest with me today, who is the leader of one of the best Beatles tribute bands, called Liverpool Shuffle, and his name is Joe Refano. Welcome, Joe. How are you tonight?
I'm great. How you doing, Ed?
Fantastic. My audience should know that Joe and I go back a long way. I've been best friends with his brother since we were in the fifth grade or thereabouts.
Gee, I'm so
And
proud of Ed.
and so it's really great to have you on.
Oh, thank
And
you.
what I like to start, Joe, is to ask you to start talking about what was your impetus to get into music? How did you get started playing guitar and so forth?
Oh boy, that's quite a question. I mean, I could go on for a few hours talking
You
about
got
that.
time?
Well, gee, how did I start? And I guess I was a fan of rock and roll music in the 1950s when I was a little kid. And what got me, my father played the guitar, and I come from a pretty musical family. My uncles all played the guitar. My mother would sing. My grandfather sang opera in Italy, actually. My brother has perfect pitch and played the trombone, plays the piano, does a bit of singing. But what really turned me on was in 1950s rock and roll. And I was a little kid, and I heard a tenor saxophone. I guess oh God, I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. I said, you know what? I want to play that because I love the way it sounded in those old records. So I was a kid in school, and in those days, if you wanted to learn an instrument, you could. And I guess I don't know if they still do that in school, but I said to my mother and father, I really want to learn to play the tenor saxophone, which I thought was just an awesome instrument. So they said, sure. We'll go to the music school wherever we went. It was in Brooklyn when I was a kid. And they said, you want to learn how to play the tenor saxophone? I said, yeah, I really do. They said, well, we don't usually start the kids on the tenor saxophone. We usually start them on the clarinet. And I said, I didn't understand that. I said, why? What does one have to do with the other? And they said, well, it's the same, many of the same fingerings and techniques, and it's easier for kids. So if you learn how to play the clarinet, it'll be a lot easier for you to, at some point in your life, to play the tenor sax, which I was not very happy about that. But I said, okay, I'll learn to play the clarinet.
Cool.
So I began taking clarinet lessons, and as as life would have it, I was a very good clarinet player. And as a really small child, I was playing with the junior high school band, and then I was playing with the high school band. But I was a little kid,
Yeah, yeah.
and then something really weird happened. In 1964, these four guys came from England,
Who were they?
and I think they called them the Beatles or something to do with
Hmm.
insects. And there were no clarinets in the Beatles, so immediately I forgot about the clarinet. I forgot about the tenor sax, and now I wanted to do something, play something, some instrument that the Beatles played. So, not knowing how to play the guitar, I gravitated to the drums because I've been told over the years with all the people I played with that I had great time, and I really could keep the beat, and I was very solid as a drummer. So my mother said, "Well, maybe you'd like to take drum lessons." I said, "Sure." So I became a drummer, and that only lasted a while. I stopped taking lessons, but my mother and father bought me a drum set, a small, simple Gretsch drum set that sounded really well and sounded great. I liked playing it.
It made a lot of noise in the
Made a lot
house.
of noise in the basement. And, it was, it was great. I really had a lot of fun with it. Well, actually, before I had the drum set, I used to bang on a waste paper basket. I used to take the cardboard pieces out of the clothes hangers and use them as drumsticks. And I used to bang on a waste paper basket. But eventually, I convinced my mother and father to buy me a drum set,
So
which they did.
this would be pre Carlos Beltran for the Houston Astros.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes. This would be pre Willie Mays on the Mets, man. So I did take lessons, but the lessons didn't last because I was actually pretty good, and I really didn't need to take lessons to play the kind of music I was playing. And I could sing. I was a singer. So next thing I know, I'm in a band with some friends. So, we're kids. We're 11,
Yeah,
12, 13 years old. And as things, happen, I ended up with my own band. Um,
fantastic.
and I was the singer in the little band. And Les Stoller, who was a guy who a lot of people know on Long Island, was in that
Right.
band. And Jimmy Sabella, who a lot of people on Long Island know, even today, is a great guitar player and a guy who owns Sabella Studios, very well known. And some other luminaries, Jeff Levitt, who was a great guitar player out in the Hamptons nowadays, plays with the Moondogs. He was in that band also. So we had this nice little band, and at that time, we were learning music, British invasion music, so the Beatles, the Stones, Herman's Hermits, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And some of the American bands too. We were really into the Byrds. Um, and I was a teenager, as a kid. I mean, it wasn't a real serious thing, but I mean, we were playing, but it got me started.
Yeah.
And one thing leads to the next. I was then playing for a few years, and you get a little bit older, and people get a little bit better on their instruments, and people want to put together more serious type bands. And I was invited to play with guys that were really good. And at that time, I always tell people that's when I was a really good guitar player back then. I don't know how great I am now, but when I was a teenager in early 20s, I was really quite a guitar player.
Wow.
And a lot of people in Long Island knew who I was. I guess I was like the hot kid on the block. Um, they used to call me Smoking Joe because I was such a hot guitar player. It's pretty funny. But
That's great.
years go by, and at that point, I'm a musician. I'm a musician.
And
People,
from what I understand, music has been part of your life. It's been part of your career,
yeah,
writing, advertising, writing jingles, writing
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I've been,
music for films and things like that, commercials
yeah,
and
I've been
stuff
doing
like
it.
that. It's pretty
Been,
exciting career.
yeah, I've been doing that for a long time, actually. And I got involved with a couple of really good bands. When I met a gentleman, his name was Vance Brescia. Became very friendly with him. And Vance wrote the song for the Monkees. That was then, this is now, which was
Yes,
their big comeback hit in 1980.
right.
And we became very friendly. And he left the band that I was playing with. And one day, seems like one day out of the blue, he called me up and said, "Listen, I'm the musical director for Peter Noon. I'm playing with Herman's Hermits, and the guys he's got in his band are really not that good. And I'm wondering if you'd be interested in coming and playing bass with us." And I said, "Sure, that'd be great. I mean, when we were kids, we played, Herman's Hermits songs
Sure.
in the bands that we were in. So I was really very familiar with the songs because I had played them all my life.
Right.
So I went and did an audition. It was funny. My audition was a cruise in the Caribbean. Told me I could bring my wife, and it was an all expenses cruise, paid cruise. And they said not only are all the expenses paid, but we're going to do a couple of shows on the boat while it's out there in the ocean, and you're going to get paid for that too. And I was like, really? So I'm going to get a free cruise. I'm going to be in the Caribbean, and I'm
and you
getting
got a
paid.
gig.
I said, wow, I mean, how can that, how could it be any better than that?
Very cool.
So I went and we had a rehearsal because on this boat, it was a huge boat and it had an auditorium and a big stage. And, I'd never met Peter Noon before, but I was introduced to him and they said, well, let's do a couple numbers. So we started to play and everybody was very happy with everything. And the next thing I know, I'm in Herman's Hermits.
That's fantastic.
And that was back in 2001, I think, or
Yeah.
2002, somewhere around there.
I had the pleasure of meeting Vance after one of Peter Noon's shows.
Ah,
Guy is such a sweet guy. He's a nice guy.
very nice
And
guy.
I've enjoyed seeing him. I've seen, of course, because I've seen you play, but I've gone to see Peter Noon and Herman Hermit several times. So I got to say 10 times at least.
Did you
And
see me play with them?
I've seen you play with them at least 3 times. In fact, I think you played the best show that he ever did.
Oh,
He was
wow,
supposed to
thank you.
play out in Massapequa. Supposed to do a show out there, and we had a rain out on that show. And eventually he scheduled it again, and I think he had rain again, and they had a school auditorium where
Oh, yeah.
they moved the location to there. I'm telling you, it was absolutely incredible. It was somebody's memorialized school.
Oh, thank
And
you.
Noon or his writers or whoever it is that's involved with that came up with all this shtick that he used for the remainder of that show, and he was great. I was with Lou when I was with Keith, Keith Sauter, our good friend, and we had like maybe within the first 5 or 6 rows or whatever it was,
Mm.
and the band was great. He was great, and it
Oh,
was so
thank you.
close, and it was just a great fun show.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I do remember that. It wasn't Massapequa, actually. It was Port Washington.
Port Washington. Okay.
And we were supposed to do a show out in this giant park right on the water. And there was a torrential downpour.
Yeah.
So we moved into the Schreiber High School auditorium,
Oh, Schreiber. Okay.
which held a bunch of, a lot of seats and a lot of people. But I mean, there were thousands of people in the park and only like 500 could get into the school. So, I mean, we felt really bad that a lot of people couldn't get in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember that was a really great show. I'm surprised that you remember that. I didn't realize you were there.
I enjoy him very much, and he still has a great voice. It's great energy, and Vance has great energy on stage. I mean, he used to do the jumping jacks. I think he's kind of cooled on jumping jacks.
Yeah,
in
well,
recent years.
it's a funny story about the jumping jacks. They were doing a show in Canada years after I was no longer playing with them, and he was doing his shtick, and he fell off the stage,
Oh, jeez.
and he actually broke his kneecaps.
Oh, man.
So the athletic shtick, so to speak, is no longer part of the act.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, moving on, after Peter Noon, you also toured with Mickey Dolenz or played as part of the Happy
Yeah.
Together tour, was it?
Actually, it was before there was the Happy Together tour. I played on some of those Happy Together tours when Herman's Hermits were the featured act, and we played, the Turtles would open up for us, and we had a lot of fun with those guys. I mean, Flo and Eddie were unbelievable characters with
Yeah.
incredible stories about playing
Sure.
with Frank Zappa and all that. But yeah, it was before the Happy Together thing. But I was only with Mickey for about a little less than 2 years, but it was fun. I mean, monkey music was interesting and fun, and I got to play all over the country, and it was cool.
That's great. I got to
I
meet
enjoyed it.
Mickey earlier this year. He was doing a show in Huntington,
Yeah,
and
you played at the Paramount, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I got a chance to. I got there early, and I didn't do it on purpose, but they just kind of waved me in, and I got over to the VIP area. And again, he's very personable. He's been doing this for what 50 some odd years,
Yeah, it's
so
funny
he
because you
knows how to
can't
do
see
it.
it, but up on the wall, right about over there, is a picture of me and Mickey that they took at, I think it was taken in Westbury.
Yeah, yeah.
When we played at Westbury. Yeah, it's funny.
But we've had it was very good. He's a very good performer still. And again, I just got to say, it was just a thrill to see you up there playing with Peter Noon or playing with Mickey or whatever. And
Well, thank you.
just last, it really was. I mean, I know you, and it's a connection, and it makes me feel good for you. You know that you
Thank
have
you.
these opportunities to play with these '60s icons. You know that
Well, I'm not an
my favorite
icon,
music.
but I am a '60s guy. I mean, and everybody knows that I've always been a real devotee of the British invasion. So, even when we do play live out nowadays,
Yeah,
when I'm not doing the Liverpool Shuffle, I'm doing, playing gigs with friends of mine. We always have a generous helping of the British invasion. Dave Clark
right.
Five, the Hermits, whatever we can think of, early Rolling Stones, Jerry and the Pacemakers. I mean, all that stuff. That's the kind of
That's
stuff I grew up with. I
that's
really
fun.
love
It's
that stuff.
great stuff.
Yeah,
It's great music. And you
yeah,
know what is great about it is that you have, and this is the thing about these tribute bands in general, is that this music is being kept alive for the audience that grew up on it, the old generation that came in after it, and the millennials that are digging it now. I
yeah.
mean,
It's true.
I meet up with a lot of the young people at Fest for Beatles fans and other Beatle type events, and I'm meeting a lot of these young people who are embracing this music and enjoying it in a whole different way.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty amazing. It's nice to see that the music has a value
yeah,
because 50 years later, people are still really digging it. So it's cool. I like that.
absolutely. So at some point, you formed the Liverpool Shuffle, and you've been building on that band over the years, and that's been a great experience. They're a terrific band.
Well, thank
Anybody
you.
that goes out to see anybody that's out in Long Island, essentially in New York, you've got to look them up and seeing if they're going to be playing in your town.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The whole Beatle thing came to me. Herman's Hermits was doing a show in oh boy, where were we? Syracuse, I think it was. Either Syracuse or Rochester, upstate New York. And the warm-up act at the theater we were playing at was a Beatles tribute band. They came on before us, and I had never really experienced that before. And Vance and I were standing in the wings, and we were listening to these guys. And I said, "Wow, that would really be a cool thing to do, to just go out and play nothing but Beatle music." And I think it was around 2003. And when I got back from that particular tour of shows with Peter Noon, I started looking around for people that I was friends with on Long Island that I knew were good musicians. And you had to have certain qualities to be in a Beatle band. You had to have a certain voice. You had to be able to play a certain style. Uh, and I was very lucky. I actually found friends and people that I knew pretty well. And I put together the first Liverpool Shuffle. And we did some gigs, and people, was well received. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah,
So as time went on, a lot of people know me because I've been in a lot of bands ever since I was a teenager, as I was saying before. And locally, people know me. And I guess my reputation must be pretty good. And I guess they figured that if he says it's going to be pretty good, it's usually pretty good. So I got hired to do a lot of shows, and it was pretty good. And the more we kept doing it, the better it got.
yeah,
Um, until it develop. And the band that I'm taking out with me now is, in my opinion, is the best of all the bands that I had. Everybody in the band is so finely in tune with what the whole Beatle thing is, the way they approach it, how they play it, the way they sing it, which makes it so much more fun for me because it takes a lot of pressure over me. I mean, I'm the leader and all that, but it's nice to have people that can do what they do. You know what I mean? So,
right.
um,
Getting back to the approach,
yeah.
you have a certain style in which you've been very detailed in regards to how you are true to the arrangements and the instrumentation of these Beatles records that you're trying to duplicate on stage, and so forth. What kind of discipline is involved in doing that?
Well, I think it takes a tremendous amount of discipline. It takes a tremendous amount of really understanding what it is you're doing. A lot of bands will go out there and they'll kind of halfway do it. I've never felt that way about it. I always wanted it to be as authentic as it could be. And I
Hmm.
mean, people disagree with me, and that's fine. But my attitude is, what, the Beatles didn't do it well enough the way they did it? You got to change it? what are you actually thinking in your silly, arrogant little way that you're going to make it better? I mean, it's kind of goofy. I mean, the
Yeah, yeah,
Beatles song catalog is the greatest song catalog in popular music history.
absolutely.
And some local kid that grew up in who knows where is going to go out there and he's going to make it better. No, sorry. I wanted to do it the way they did it because the way they did it was amazing. And I saw them live, so I know how amazing it was. And so that's the approach I always took. And I'm lucky because I landed with a bunch of guys that feel the same way. And it's hard. It's hard to do, but it's really fulfilling. It's very satisfying when you do it and it really comes off the way it should. And the audience
Yeah.
can feel that it's really what it should be and they love it. And
So, I mean, I've seen the reaction when I've seen you in concert, or I've seen you in a club, or I've seen you in a bar or whatever. Um, I know I've seen you at a party when you've done parties. And if you guys want to go out and check out Liverpool Shuffle, firstly, you got to go to their website, the Liverpool Shuffle, all one word. Please make sure you put the in there. And you can hire them for parties. You can hire them for corporate events. They play all over the place. They
we
play all
do
kinds of.
everything. People say
They
to me,
play
"Where do you
band
play?"
shells at Jones
I say,
Beach.
"Wherever they got money, that's where I play."
They play everywhere, and so you might want to check out the website. You can contact Joe directly at what is your email? Joe Refano.
Well, Joe Ref, JOEREF, at theliverpoolshuffle.com. Very simple.
Right on. And we'll give you this information again towards the end, but I want to make sure we got that in. But yeah, it's great. They really do a great show, and they make it a lot of fun. And it's a dance party, whatever it is, and it's a tribute to this music.
Thank
And
you. I
lately, you guys
appreciate
have
it.
been doing my pleasure, Joe. Lately, you guys have been doing the Sergeant Pepper album.
Yeah, we have. That was a real labor of love because they're talking about difficulty. You know, if you measure difficulty on a scale of 1 to 10, that's like 14. It's not easy, but I think we made a good account of ourselves. Friends who are serious musicians, including Vance Brescia, and other people who are well known on the island came to see us do it, and you know the reviews were really good. So it was gratifying that we spent so much time and energy and rehearsals getting it down, and you know I think we did a pretty good job. And there was only 5. We usually play with a 4-man Beatle band, but we had to bring in a 5th guy to do the Sergeant Pepper stuff because it's just so complex that you can't possibly.
Sure.
The Beatles couldn't do it live. They really couldn't. They certainly couldn't with the technology that was available in 1967. There was no way they could have done it. But even if they had the technology, they couldn't have done it with just 4 people. There's just too much going on the record. But you know, I think we did a pretty good job of bringing it to life. And you know, like I say, the reviews were really good. So it made me feel good that we really accomplished something.
You know, the funny thing you mentioned about the Beatles not performing it, or even performing some of their later material, because of the mania that was attached to their performances in the 60s, early 60s, they were, I guess they got really turned off by the whole idea of live performances and that they would prefer to work in the studio. But, you know, by the later 60s, by 68 or so, more sophisticated shows were being able to put on around that time. And it's a shame that they didn't really try to put something together.
Well, the electronic technology still wasn't up to where it is, you know, where it could have been.
No.
But with the synthesizers and all the equipment they have now, they could have easily put on a show and toured. But
Yeah.
you know, there was the time and place. You know, they had their moment.
Right.
But yeah, yes, I think that they truly could have pulled it off because there are Beatles tribute bands around the world that are doing a pretty good job of pulling it off now because the equipment is so good. You know.
So let me just go through the members of your band here. So we have Joe Refano, we have Chief Beatle, we have Jamie Bateman, and we have Andrew Lubman, Brian James, who is the drummer.
Correct.
And we have Dave Clark, who adds extra bass and
he's the fifth. He's the fifth wheel. When we need to do like a John Lennon tribute show or a Sergeant Pepper show or something a little bit out of the ordinary. We need more hands on deck.
Yeah.
We bring Dave in, but Dave is great in the four-man situation also. If Andrew Loveman is an amazing musician. He plays in wedding bands. He plays in all kinds of bands.
Yeah.
So there are moments when he is unavailable. And I met Dave. I became friendly with Dave, and Dave came to the rescue. Dave sings a very admirable Paul McCartney. He plays great bass. He's a really great guy, and he sort of plugged the hole. So I'm a lucky guy.
I've seen videos and heard some of the current band. So I've not seen the actual band live in a couple of years.
Have you seen
I've
any of
got
the
to get out
video
and see
from the
you
John
guys.
Lennon show?
No, I haven't. I haven't. I haven't been. I have to get out and see you guys.
There's some stuff on the website. You could some video of it if you're. Also, I think there's some stuff on the Facebook page if you want to see what we did.
Okay, cool. So we'll do that.
Hey Ed, is this like a PG-16 show? Can I drink my wine while I'm talking to you?
Please drink your wine.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that's interesting is that as a young person, that you heard that tenor sax.
Yeah.
And when you hear that tenor sax and you connect with it, that's really the sign of a real musician. I mean, I can love a song that I've been loving since I was 6 to 7 years old, but I could never play it. I could never sing it. I could never, whatever. I don't have the connection to it as a musician. And so I really appreciate what a musician can do and what he can hear and what an instrument can be, what it can do for you.
Well, yeah. I mean, even it's funny because even to this day, I love the sound of that tenor sax. I mean, Clarence Clemens and Bruce Springsteen's band, perfect example. But there's so many that tenor sax had such a place in early rock and roll.
Yeah.
So many great players, and it just had that growling sound. It added so much to the texture of the early rock and roll stuff. I love that thing. But and nowadays, I got my hands full. I got enough.
Absolutely.
I don't need to learn how to play the tenor sax at my age.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about the sax became so prevalent in the 80s. It came back from the 50s and early 60s. And in the 80s, you can hear it in virtually every top 40 record as the sax solo,
Yeah.
And so, you hear people complain about 80s sound and 80s this and 80s that, and it sounds outdated. Do you get caught up in music being from a certain period and whether that's connected solely to that period, or can you appreciate it for being as to whenever it might have been released?
Well, I mean, I love music. Music is music. If you're a musician or a true lover of music, I mean, I can listen to a song from the 1940s and know how amazing it is. And I can hear something in the 50s that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And of course, the 60s, I mean, there was so much brilliant music being created in the 60s. It changed everything. It changed the world.
Yeah.
But even the 70s, I mean, every decade has its thing, I mean, in the 70s, you had Led Zeppelin,
Right.
You had Deep Purple, you had later in the 70s, you had U2 appear on the scene, and the Police in the early 80s. I mean, every
era's got its different sound, right? Yeah.
All the time slots for each decade has got its thing, and even now, I mean, there's music being created now that I find very interesting. For instance, have you heard of this band Boy Genius?
No.
Okay. They've been featured in Rolling Stone. It's a band that's very retro. They're all female, young females. And they're sort of like a cross between early Beatles and REM. It's very retro. And it's really interesting. I mean, they have their own take on it. I mean, obviously, you grow up in a certain time period and you're connected to the music and the pop culture of that time period. I mean, I'm always going to be influenced by 50s, 60s, and 70s because that's when I was a young person. And young people connect with their music. But, I try to stay open to it and listen to see what's going on in the world all the time. You don't want to just shut yourself away. You got to give my mother a lot of credit. My mom is 92 years old and she listens to everything. She'll sing a piece of opera for you, and then she'll talk about the Beatles, and then she'll talk about, she was even talking to me about the Moody Blues the other day. I mean, it's you got to keep living. You got to
Yeah,
like you want to keep experiencing the world around you, and music is, I mean, it's so prevalent in the world and in society. I mean, I don't think that I could just only listen to this and not
right,
that.
right.
You know, I love Beethoven. I love jazz fusion. I love Pat Metheny is probably the last 15 years or 20 years has been my most favorite artist. I mean,
Wow.
I listen to him all the time because I love
Yeah,
what he does.
yeah,
Um, it's very complex. It's very avant-garde. It's very spaced out, but it's so melodic and beautiful at the same time. So,
yeah,
you know, you gotta, I try to experience art, all art, even as it's being created. I mean,
yeah.
there's even some rap stuff that I can get a kick out of and listen to.
Yeah, yeah. Every once in a while, there's something. I find that I've been trying to open myself up to different things too. I do spend way too much time listening to the music that has been around me for
Oh, well,
40,
we all
50
do.
years.
We all
But
do.
I've really gotten into country, Zach Brown band, in particular. I think they're a tremendous band, and they have tribute bands. And I
Sure.
laugh about that with my niece the other day because they're big fans of it. And I said, they're relatively new band. I mean, they've been around a while, but it's like now they have a tribute band. So,
Well,
so the
they
tribute
were
band is
really big.
is huge and it's happening. And hopefully, if this goes well, we're going to be interviewing a lot more people who have these tribute bands and chat
Well,
with them. And
I know just about all of them on Long Island, so
and you've
I'd be
been in a
happy to
couple of them.
I'd be happy to turn you on to some of these guys. But yeah, absolutely. Well, that
Cool.
country pop music is really happening these days.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I've actually gotten involved in writing music that is sort of in that vein because people that represent me, you know, want that kind of music to try to pitch to their artists.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like some of it. I've never been, how can I put this? I've never been on a real pop kind of guy. You know, I'm always looking for something a little deeper.
Right.
Um, you know, and so, you know, I try to like dig a little deeper into things and find out what they're doing and what they're thinking. Um, you know, I've never been a huge country fan, but I mean, I always liked Willie Nelson. I always loved Johnny Cash. I mean,
Yeah.
these are really seriously talented people. I love Chris Christopherson.
Right.
Um, so, you know, I try to get a little, look, I like to look at the home menu.
Right.
Some
Right.
people can only eat Italian food. I eat every kind of food, okay? And
Well,
music is
the funny thing
the
about
same way.
the funny thing about these bands is that um when you're looking at these country bands, first of all, Lou was your friend, your brother Lou
Yeah,
is an
he's really
influence
into
on
it.
me regarding the country.
Yeah, he's
He
really
got
into that.
he got me on that long time ago, and it took me a while, and then I kind of hooked on it.
Well, he's a real
But
outlaw country guy. He's not a pop country guy. You know,
but the
he's into
idea
Waylon, Jennings, and those guys. You
but
know,
the idea behind going into it is because I got so fed up because I was a pop music guy. I was an AM guy. Maybe you were an FM guy. So I always went for the AM side of stuff. And of course, now with the changes in how radio does, or what we might call radio today, or things like that, what's considered to be a top 40 record or whatever today, I don't relate to it anymore. And so I'm trying to find something that is reminiscent in some version of sound where Zach Brown or some of these other country bands, which are some of them are pop, some of them are a little bit more straightforward country or even outlaw,
sure.
but it's guitar, it is in synth or whatever they call it
Well, it's less
smashing
electronic.
up or rap or whatever, throwing all that kind of stuff into it. It's more authentic, it's more organic, and
True.
that's what turns me on
Well, the
you know
Americana thing is a big deal the last few years. There are bands that are doing really rootsy stuff. Um, but you know, the music, the whole field has opened up to such a gigantic extent that there's people doing everything.
yeah,
I mean, there's guys playing the banjo now doing jazz fusion
yeah,
on a
yeah.
banjo. So, you
Interesting.
know, there's a lot of opportunities for people to express themselves in different ways, and that's a good thing, you know.
Right, right,
Uh,
right, right, right.
It's a very good thing, I think.
So one of the things that I enjoyed very much was, I'm not sure if it was maybe it was 10 years ago. You guys were playing the Liverpool Shuffle. You guys were all playing at a Italian festival somewhere out on Long Island. And Lou and I, unfortunately, it wasn't a huge crowd for the bands, but I remember Lou and I had like front row seats while you guys were playing, and you guys were tremendous, and you did everything from the whole Beatles songbook.
Where was
And
this? I'm not
it was
remembering
somewhere
this.
out on Long Island. I don't remember exactly where it was. It was a, you
You
know, it
said
was
about
a,
10 years ago?
some was around 10 years ago.
Might it happen to have been an Italian feast in Oyster Bay?
That might have been it. It was an Italian feast. I know that.
Yeah, I think I remember that. I think the weather was kind of funky too, if I remember correctly, which probably had something to do with
What was nice about it for me is that I got to meet your friend Freddie.
Freddie.
Freddie Giovanelli, who was the bassist slash Paul McCartney of Liverpool Shuffle for many years,
Mm,
and very, very talented guy. Had a great voice. He did McCartney fantastic.
best guy, best impersonation of Paul McCartney, young McCartney I've ever heard in my life.
And he was just such a nice guy. Got a chance to meet him,
Big
chat
heart,
with him for a while.
big heart,
And
and talented. He actually worked for Paul McCartney.
yeah, but he was this tech guy, was it?
Yeah, 3 years he worked with him.
Yeah,
He was his everything. He was the gopher. He was the tech guy. And when they needed something,
Impersonated him.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny story. In Valentine's Day, I guess about maybe 10 years ago, I get a call from Freddie, and he says to me, "We're going to New York City tonight because I just got a message from Wick Wickens, who is uh, McCartney's
Keyboardist.
musical director, and he says they're going to be doing a show at Irving Plaza tonight, and they want us to come and hang out." So I had never met Paul McCartney, so I thought, "Wow, this is a cool thing." And it was right around the time of the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live. They had that whole TV special.
Yes, I remember that.
And what they decided to do was McCartney, they announced in the afternoon that they were going to sell tickets for this Irving Plaza show. Now, Irving Plaza holds about 1,000 or 1,200 people,
Right.
except that the tickets went on sale at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they got 150,000 requests. So they sold it out. Anyway, make a long story even longer. I said to my wife, it's Valentine's Day. Is it okay if I go and try to meet Paul McCartney? And she said, "Sure, we'll have Valentine's Day tomorrow." It was a freezing cold night. I remember that. It was like 20 degrees or less. And me and Freddie hooked up and we drove into the city, went to the stage door, and he told the guy who he was and that he knew Wicks. And we got in. And we were hanging out with the people from Saturday Night Live. There was Fred Armisen and
Wow.
all these various people were hanging out. We were all standing there together in a special area. And McCartney and the stage was maybe only 30 or 40 feet away. So we were very close. And that was that time when McCartney's voice, you could tell, was starting to go.
Yeah.
But that night, he was unbelievable. It was like, I guess he knew I was there or something, and he wanted to do it for me.
Good for you, right?
It
Yeah.
was incredible. One of the greatest shows I ever heard. So the show, and we were supposed to meet him. So the show ends, and Wicks calls Freddie's phone and says, "Listen, man, Sir Paul is exhausted." I mean, even 10 years ago, he was like 73 or whatever.
Right.
And he has a place up on Central Park West near where John Lennon lived, near the Dakota. And he goes, he's sorry. He really wants to see you. He wants to meet your friend Joe and all that, but he is just burnt.
Yeah.
So we're putting him in a cab and we're sending him home. But it was a really cool night. I mean, I got to see I had never seen McCartney. I mean, I saw him in the Beatles, but I'd never seen him in a show like that.
Yeah.
And
That must have been incredible to have that kind of an intimate setting.
yeah, it was amazing. It was truly amazing. It was such a tiny little place, and to be hearing this music up close and personal,
Right.
it really was quite. It was very entertaining, and it was really amazing. Sorry, I didn't meet Paul McCartney, of course.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool. I mean, I came pretty close.
I had a possibility myself when he was doing a show at Madison Square Garden sometime in the late 2000s. And I think it was before the City Field show, maybe around 2005. And my brother Michael had met a young lady, and she ended up being Paul's publicist, something like that, or something along those lines. And the funny thing
What
is,
was her name?
I don't remember her name,
Oh, okay.
but she didn't really even know who he was. It's hard to believe, but it's just, this is my job, and do you want to meet him, And so we're like, yeah, we want to meet him, but then I chickened out because I was I didn't like the idea that, people are meeting people like that fast, and sometimes it can be a very negative thing, if it isn't exactly the way you want it to be, or you have high expectations or
Sure,
emotional.
sure.
And I can get very emotional when it comes to things like that. So I figured, you know what? I'll pass on it. I'll make too much of a deal out of it, and I'll embarrass myself or whatever. And so I passed on it. But I was close enough, So
Gotcha.
anyway, this has been a great deal of fun. Before we go, I want to ask you a couple of other questions.
Sure.
The Beatles released what they're calling their last single. It was called Now and Then. It just came out like about last week or so.
Mm.
What do you think of it?
I listened to it a bunch of times, and I like it very much. I think it's a John Lennon at his best. I mean, he wrote a beautiful melody.
Yeah,
He wrote interesting, introspective lyrics. People, some of my friends and musicians, we've all talked about what exactly it's all about. I mean, I personally think he wrote it to Paul. Sounds like he's talking to Paul. I mean, the last thing that Lennon said to Paul, the last time they saw each other,
hmm
was, "Old friend, think of me now and then."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I have a pretty strong feeling that he wrote the song for Paul. I like the way it was produced. I think that Paul and Ringo did a good job adding, to what they needed to add to. And George had played on it originally in 1995, I guess it was,
Right,
when they were going to release it as part of the anthology. And at that time, they didn't have the AI technology to pull Lennon's voice out of, off the cassette and have it sound just like him.
right,
And people are actually talking about they may want to go back and remix Free as a Bird and Real Love, because now they can really get John's voice
right up
where
front.
it should be.
Yeah,
Because when the technology was so bad. I mean, John was just doing a rough demo in his apartment just so he
right.
could remember the song. And the recording technology, he was doing it on a cassette player. It was terrible.
Yeah,
And they did their best. But now, through the use of AI technology, it isolates the voice from the recording. So
yeah.
they really can pull John's voice off the recording. And I'm hoping that they're going to do it, because I think it would be amazing. I mean, if you listen to Now and Then, it sounds like he's in the studio just singing right into the mic.
He's right there with them. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
I mean, it's
incredible.
it's really it's really awesome. And I hope they do that. Let me ask you a
Well, they
question.
have a few things in the pipeline. They have Rubber Soul that's being worked on. And supposedly, Anthology itself is being redone, given the
Remastered and all that,
Peter
sure.
Jackson / Giles Martin treatment.
Let me ask you a question. Have you heard the AI version of Now and Then that sounds like 1964? Have you heard that?
No, not heard that version. No.
What they did was, well, you know how AI works. They said to the computer, we want to, they must have fed the song Now and Then into it, so it knew it had a reference point. And they said, what would it sound like if the Beatles recorded this song in 1964? And AI is very incredible. It's amazing, but it is so
It's
scary to me.
scary as hell.
If you go on Instagram, you can find it.
Yeah,
It sounds exactly like what it would have sounded like had they recorded and sang it in 1964.
that's
It's
incredible.
really crazy. It's
Yeah,
really and here's the crazier part. It's really good.
yeah.
So check that out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Well, I enjoyed the John's actual demo, because that's been on YouTube for a while
Sure,
now.
sure.
And there's an extra verse that he into, or I guess it's a bridge you
Yeah.
put into the song that I guess Paul and Ringo decided wasn't going to be, but they couldn't
They
work with
didn't
it,
think it was good enough or
or
something.
they couldn't write something in replace of it. Like I thought,
Yes.
I listened to it and I thought, particularly if it's supposed to be written to Paul, then wouldn't it be beautiful if,
Yes.
John is singing, I don't want to lose you. And Paul said, you're not going to lose me. Don't, whatever, you're not going to go away, something like that. Or I'm not going anywhere, something like that would have been incredible. But
That's
then you got to
true.
take into account Paul's voice today. How
Right.
would that have come off? Would
True.
they have to AI that? And how
True.
do you feel about that? And so I guess they felt it was best to leave it alone.
Some
I
things are best left alone, actually.
What surprised me about the song and what thrills me about it is, and again, I'm sure there's some adjustment with the technology, but just listening to John Lennon sing that song, he's a guy that's working a song, getting it out of his head, getting it on tape. What I'm going to do with it, I have no idea. Just going to get the song out on tape. He's singing it beautifully with emotion.
Yeah, it's
And
great.
it makes you feel so good to hear it. It's like In My Life. It's that kind of feeling.
Yes, I know exactly what you're
And
saying.
and so I really did enjoy the record, and I think that they did a good job producing it. I think I can excuse Giles Martin for tagging in the harmonies from other songs into it. I don't think they needed to do that, but that was the decision they made, and Paul and Ringo
Paul, I'm
agreed to
sure,
it.
I'm sure that most of that decision came from Paul,
Yeah,
but no, but I'm happy with it. I mean, if the
yeah,
other interesting thing is that John Lennon formed the Beatles and wrote most of the early stuff and was the pretty much the leader of the Beatles, and now here we went full circle.
yeah,
Now we have a song that sounds mostly like a John Lennon almost solo uh, composition, ending the Beatles. So
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
certain nice
Certain
symmetry.
trilogy,
Yeah,
symmetry. Yes, yes. Cool, very cool. All right, so we're getting towards the end here. So, Joe, what I'd like to ask you to do is to let everyone know where they can reach you, how they can
sure,
contact you.
sure. Well, the best thing to do would be to go to the liverpoolshuffle.com, our website. There's a calendar. There's a contact page if you'd like to get on the mailing list. There's my email is there, joeref@theliverpoolshuffle.com. There's video. There's photographs. There's all kinds of cool stuff there. There's a what's new. There's a page called What They're Saying about people that we'd worked with over the years that had comments about working with us and with the band. That would be the best thing to do. I do get people calling me on my cell phone. I think it's better if you go to the website
That's a good idea.
because I
So,
get a lot of calls from people that I don't know, and so I don't answer it because it looks like spam or craziness. The best
well,
thing would be to just send me an email and go to
that
the website.
that's fantastic. So, folks, please go out. Seeing Liverpool Shuffle is a great show. So I totally recommend you doing that. So it's been wonderful having you on the show with us today. And
Thank you. I
so I thank
appreciate it.
everyone for uh, listening and watching our show today. You can always reach me on Facebook. Go to Ed Rising on Facebook. You can email me at erising4@aol.com. And you go to the YouTube page. My YouTube page, I have all these videos from this show, which will be coming up pretty soon on YouTube and various other places, Spotify and other streaming platforms and Facebook, of course. It'll be out there.
You're
So
everywhere, Ed. You're
I'm
everywhere.
everywhere, man. I'm everywhere. Just like Johnny Cash. And anyway, making a long story longer, as you said earlier. Um, Hopefully you'll check us out, and I thank you very much. You have a wonderful evening, everyone. Beatles forever.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, man. Good night.